of the other things about the book and Rhyme and Reason that I liked is, as you mentioned with Heavy D, you have him at the barber shop, you got him at the park. Some of the I just like the fact there's so many different settings. You know, you got some people performing, some people just standing in the neighborhood, different things. So
Yes.
was that a conscientious effort to have different settings, or did it naturally unfold that way? Like, how did that work?
I think, yeah, I think that was part of the scheme of the movie. I mean, I tell people, like, they always ask me, like, why did you make Rhyme and Reason? So I had been working in the music video world, and I'd done a lot of music videos, worked on other people's videos and stuff like that. And I always felt like videos kind of, especially at the time, um, created a sense of fantasy, of what life, like, are people really living like that? With the yachts and the thing and the big houses. We'd rent these houses for these guys to hang out for a day. You know what I mean? But particularly in the '90s, people weren't living that way. But that's hip hop. Braggadocio. Make it bigger than it is. All that kind of stuff. And then at the same time, it was big. Hip hop, rap was condemned by the mainstream media. Being misogynistic and violent. And I felt like, gosh, whenever I did a music video, and look, I wasn't really a great music video director. I mean, as much as I love videos and all that kind of stuff, and I've done a bunch of them, I feel like that's not really my calling. But what I loved was the relationship and the interaction behind the camera, of how these guys hung out, the relationship with their friends and their homies and their, people. I thought, God, someone should show that side of hip hop. The culture, the way these people interact with each other, the way they, the relationship with their families, and I also was a musician and being in a rock band, and I always felt like this was, like when you're in a rock band, you're not looking to bring up the neighborhood with you. You know what I mean? You're like looking to make it on your own with your bandmates or whatever, but you're not. Hip hop is something completely different. People don't really get it. It's like they're, they're feeding a lot of people behind them in one way or another. Like people would make fun of the guy up in I can't think of it, MC Hammer, for losing all his money. I could definitely get that. I mean, all the people that he was connected with, and and they feel an obligation, and they feel, so I wanted to get I wanted people to get a sense of what that was. And I felt like that's the hip hop I was connected to.
Yeah. And another great picture in the Book of Rhyme and Reason that you have that shows generational bridge, divide, gap, but as a unison was the Curtis Blow with Lauryn Hill.
Yeah.
So how, when and why did that happen in the way that it did?
You know, um, God, I gotta think about that. But I think that they had worked together. They had some relationship. So I think that came about because Curtis was working with another group who I don't think really went anywhere, but he wanted to introduce them um, to her and to the Fugees at the time. You know,
Okay.
you
And
know.
what and what as you're doing this, how did you balance like, hey, we're making a movie, but oh, also give me a couple minutes for photographs? How did that affect the flow? Did that interrupt it? Because people now everything is so instant, but back then things would take a little more time. It wasn't
Oh
so.
yeah, yeah. We shot film. I mean, we shot 16 millimeter film. Um, every shoot was different. You know, I mean, there were shoots where I was taking photographs or not taking photographs. Like it wasn't that it was so guerrilla that there were times where we were where I had a little bit of a crew, and then there are times where I was really doing everything. When you shoot 16, you really do need a couple of people because just of the technology, loading film, downloading film, the sound has to be a separate thing. It can't be, you know, so you've got to have some person doing sound there. So there would be like a little downtime where I could take a few photos, and I tried to keep everything. Most of the photos I think are available light. There are probably some with a flash, but not that many. Um, and sometimes the work lights or the lights that I had lighting for the for film, I use my camera. So yeah, I mean, I think I did have some flash system for this thing. It was pretty archaic though. But it worked. It worked. I mean, it all, the format is very beefy in terms of what you can draw out of the image.
Yes. And one of the more powerful photos in the book of Rhyme and Reason, I thought, was the ones you have of Slick Rick. So
Oh,
he obviously had been incarcerated and didn't have that much exposure at the time. So how did you go? How were you able to get access to him? And then what was his mood and the ambiance like getting him involved in the film and now in this book?
yeah, that was pretty crazy. I can't I can't really tell you because I just can't remember who set that interview up. I know that um I could have done it, but I just don't remember how that happened. I do remember it had more to do with whoever referred us or whatever gave us the whatever go ahead to do it. It was more with the prison system and trying to get that going. And it took months. Took probably a good 6 months before they said yes and agreed to it. Um, and I think I could be wrong, but I think that was a Dannemora prison, the same prison that Tupac was locked up in. Um, and dude, it felt like the Shawshank Redemption, man.
Yeah,
I,
I've been there. I went to visit Old Dirty Bastard there. So
you
yeah,
did. Oh,
it's
you
like
know,
it's like a fort. It's
it
crazy.
is, man. I mean, God, you go in and it could be cold outside, and then you go in and you're really cold. I mean, it's just it has some bad vibes, like I but we were there, and then then he shows up in his prison clothes, and we did the interview, and um yeah, I mean, he couldn't have been nicer. I mean, he was very transparent with what occurred, what got him in there, and the things that went down that day. But yeah, yeah. I mean, he was a big star too. I mean, I would say early '90s. He was one of the top guys, man.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
and I feel like it was really unjust. I mean, they were even what's crazy is we've heard these stories about hip hop artists using the lyrics of their songs in the court case, which is ridiculous. I mean, this is insane to me that could occur. But they were using his lyrics against him. And I'm like, wait a minute. He was always like the cautionary tale guy. You know what I mean? Like, don't do that. Yeah, this is what's going to happen. So I was like, wow. But I, I'm glad that all that worked out for him, man. And but yeah, it was yeah. We set up our lights. We did the interview. I took some photographs, and yeah.
Okay. And then of course Ice-T did the forward. So back then, and Ice talks about this in the forward in the mid and getting into the later 90s. Ice-T hadn't been on Law and Order yet. Dr. Dre wasn't a mogul. Ice Cube wasn't a mogul. So, what did you see with Ice in particular? He was still a star and a big one at that. at the time when you guys went and interviewed him and photographed him. But what did you see or notice about him that may have been different or distinctive compared to some of the other people?
Well, to me, he was one of the loudest voices in hip hop at the time. I mean, when you think of all the pressure that he was under, for some of the music that he created, and I thought that he was a very articulate voice, really expressed himself well. There was no doubt I wanted him in the film. I felt like if anybody could clear up, what this whole thing was about, he would be able to be the guy. And he was going through a lot at that time, and that was like 92, 93, cop killer, I mean, that whole thing. And yeah, he was really getting it from the mainstream media, you know.
For sure.
So yeah, I thought I just felt like he represented, particularly on the Los Angeles side. I don't know, I haven't told you this part of the story, but when I started making Rhyme and Reason, I thought I was finished with the film like in 90, like we started 94, 95-ish. I was, I had a lot of people. I had Wu-Tang, I had Slick Rick at the time. I think I had EPMD. I had a bunch of artists, and I came out to LA to see a few people, and I showed them some of the stuff that I was shooting, and they got really upset. And they were like, wait a minute, hang on. There's no hip hop in LA. There's no rap in LA. Are you kidding me? And I was like, oh my God, they're right. You know what I mean? And I had to move. The reason why I'm living here in LA is because I had no connections out here. I didn't really know anybody out here. I came out and, just started beating the pavement, trying to connect with people. And I realized, like, yeah, LA, I mean, I might have been New York biased, like Nas and all, like that kind of hip hop. And I didn't take LA as seriously as maybe I should have, and the West Coast. And, it took me coming out here to really get it, so it's part of the reason why it took as long as it did to make, because I thought I was pretty close to finishing the film when I realized, oh my gosh, we really have to get West Coast representation to make a film about this culture, And then I think I also tried to, I ended up going to New Orleans for Master P, and I went to Atlanta for Jermaine Dupri and other folks like that. So to give it, more of a, universal feel.
Well rounded. And the irony is, with the Rhyme and Reason soundtrack that you had, Nothing But the Cabbie hit with Mac 10 and the Dog Pound is West Coast. So
yeah.
What since the people were surprised that you had a soundtrack deal and that was on Priority Records, which seemingly did a great job with that from everything I could tell, but what did you notice having a big radio song, having a big video? How did that affect the momentum and the movement of the film itself?
I think they worked hand in hand. You always hope that if you do a soundtrack, that 1+1, the soundtrack and the movie are going to equal like 4 or 5 rather than just 2. And I think that happened. I think it really did create awareness for both the film and the soundtrack. I think they both, I think they worked well together. I was really pleased with the soundtrack. I got to give a lot of credit to Andrew Shack and Happy Walters and Spring Aspers, who did a lot of the heavy lifting for that thing. But they when you get involved with making a film, there's so many things happening, and they were very respectful about checking with me to make sure, like, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And the different songs I was using. For the most part, I was very happy with the selection of songs. There were a couple things that got, somehow went through the cracks. I think there was a KRS-One song that I really wanted. I told him, hey, look, I want this song, and for some reason it didn't make it to the soundtrack. And a Cypress Hill song too as well. I couldn't believe it. Like, what happened? KRS understood. Cypress were a little upset about it, which they should have been, and we talked about it, but it was all good. But you're really, when you're doing something at that level with a Miramax, who's the hottest studio at the time, and you've got all these folks, it's like being on a train. You just hope you can hold on, and things have happened. They happen quickly. If you're not a quick decision maker, I would never advise being in this game, because things are going to happen, and decisions have to be made, and they've got dates, and they've got this, and they've got that, and test screenings, and yeah, I mean, it's just crazy.